Welcome to Conversapien, the podcast all about having conversations with interesting Homo sapiens. I'm your host and favorite of the species, Caleb Wilemon, and I want to thank you for making Conversapien a part of your day. Hey, do you have a great story to tell? Are you ready to share your insights and experiences with the world? If that sounds like you or someone you know, come get on the show. You can send us guest suggestions, comments, questions, and any other type of feedback by emailing conversapien@gmail.com. That's conversapiens@gmail.com. Don't forget the S at the end of the word sapien. Next week, my friend Duncan McCrary will be joining us all the way from Japan to discuss his experience living there over the last couple years, where he teaches English as a foreign language. If you have any questions about Japanese culture, or anything related to that sort of thing for Duncan, you can also send them to that same email address. Today's guest is Christopher Screws. Chris is a coworker of mine who's been teaching art for going on 19 years. He teaches art 1 through 4, AP art, and he has pioneered a very special effects and makeup class that's one of only 5 such courses offered in high schools in the entire United States. Chris also runs a haunted house experience called the Insanitarium Haunt, and he recently has started creating YouTube tutorials for art. So if you want to learn how to draw, paint, ink, or just observe the world as an artist would, you can check that out by looking up his YouTube channel called Create Art with Chris. In my conversation with Chris, we talked about learning and teaching art. Talked about some philosophical considerations for what art is, how inspiration manifests for him and other artists, along with a lot of other things that I think you'll find really interesting. All that coming up right after this really cool stinger.
You're listening to
Conversapien.
Mr. Screws, how are you today?
Doing
on this
well,
lovely
sir.
Friday.
Doing well. How
Are
are
you
you?
surviving the COVID? Is the question.
Yes, I am. Yeah, we're good and healthy here.
Good. That's awesome. I know you wear glasses like me, and we're both
Right.
teachers.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask, have you found a solution for wearing masks that do not fog up your glasses? Does one exist?
Not completely, but any mask that I've had that's had a metal nose piece where I can bend it and then place it underneath my glasses, I have more success.
So putting it up under the... Okay. That's a strategy I'll have to try. I've been Googling specifically for that because I know in the fall when we start back school, or however that's going to look in the fall,
Right.
both me and everyone else that wears glasses
It
may
will be an
doomed.
issue.
Yeah, doomed to a life of fog, and I would like to avoid that. Well, Chris, as I said in the intro, is an art teacher with me at Pinson. We're going to talk a little bit today about what he does as an artist and also what he does as a teacher. So I guess I'll start it right off. How did you get into art? Is it something that you grew up always doing, or what does that story kind of look like?
Yeah, I just wanted to learn how to draw Batman.
Really? You want to learn how to draw Batman?
That was the thing. Yeah, so when I never remember a time when I wasn't drawing. And I think that's true with most children, is that you just inherently, that's just part of your life, is you create, and at a certain point it stops. But for me, it didn't. So around 6th grade is when I remember distinctly wanting to get better. And that's what I've found, is that that's about the time where you either stop or you continue. So around 6th grade, I talked to my parents, and they found someone locally who taught art lessons.
Yeah.
And I learned how to draw people a little bit better, and painting landscapes and just very traditional type things.
Right.
I kept reminding the teacher, I just want to learn how to draw Batman. But we came back to that because I eventually learned I need to know how to draw a person before I can draw a particular person.
Right. I've noticed in your classroom you have a lot of Funko Pops and things like that.
Yeah.
And so I guess
toys,
comic book
yeah.
sort of things are kind of right up your alley.
Oh, absolutely.
That's interesting that you started out with an interesting comics. I remember I have a friend who's in graphic design now professionally, went to school for it. And when we were kids, it was all about drawing. Dragon Ball Z was both me and him.
Yeah.
I can remember being 9 and 10 and trying to draw Goku and all this other stuff with him, and he was obviously a little more into it than me, and now he's in art too. So that's interesting how that can be what would you say, an avenue for kids to be interested in art in the first place, is how they're in contact with it at all times through animation. So you get into art through Batman. How do you get into teaching art in particular? Where does the teaching come in?
I think that comes back to what I saw growing up. So my father is a minister. He's a United Methodist minister, and my mother is a teacher. So showing other people how to do things, or showing other people how to, it's tough to explain, but I think art is this perfect combination of showing people how to create things. So there's that educational aspect, but there's also that fulfilling of our soul.
Sure.
It's not just a typical core class in the classroom. So
there's some expression involved, I guess, that you may not see in a core core class, or the expression of whatever's inside that kind of wants to come out through art.
Most definitely.
Do you think people in general overestimate the role of talent when it comes to like learning art?
I think so. Yes.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I'm no artist, but that's, when you talk to people, they always tend to default to, I can't draw and I can't paint. And it's kind of like, well, there's a whole lot of art teachers out there that may argue differently.
Right. So I hear that every day in the classroom. I can't. So what I want to say is, sure, yeah, you can't yet.
Yeah.
So as long as we add that word "yet" to the end of it,
right,
we got to add that word. So I totally believe that there are people that are more inclined to want to learn, and I think people read that as skill because it's not necessarily their first day. And this happens in my classroom again every day, but especially in those Art 1 classes, you see kids who are trying art for the first time. So that's tough. And then there are other kids in there. They're not at the beginning of their journey. They're in the middle of their journey. So when you got one kid at the beginning, one kid in the middle, and they see the discrepancies between the two pieces, it's tough. So we got to get them over that hurdle. And that's part of the job.
Yeah. And so much of that, I think, is born out of comparing oneself to other people. It really isn't when you hear people say, I can't draw, I can't do this and that, it's like, well, I got to observe one of your classes, and I don't know how you would not be able to do that following the steps, but I guess it's easy to look at the neighbor who, grew up drawing, who already had this passion for it, and whose eyeball is, taking shape without having to do all the little steps to get to that point, and to say, well, if they can do that, then, and I'm only getting to this misshapen thing on paper, clearly I'm missing something, or I'm not able to do it. Right. And by the way, I use your class, well, not your class, but art class in general as an example all the time as a Spanish teacher, because I have a lot of kids who already speak Spanish that will be in Spanish 1, Spanish 2. And ideally we would have them in like a heritage speaker class, but some semesters we've been able to offer it and some semesters not. Right. But I'll always have a kid that will say, oh, that's not fair, they already speak Spanish. And I'll always say, well, if you go down to Mr. Screw's room, you're going to find a person that already draws really well. That's just life. People have, these different strengths and passions and talents that have gifted them with these skills. And you probably have the same thing going for you that'll help you in another class.
That's right, yeah.
My Spanish speaker over here has this advantage in this class. Speaking of that issue of, the kids with different passion levels, different talents, if we're going to use the T word, coming into it, how do you address that in the classroom when you have such a different spectrum of skill?
So you have to call it out. That's the first step. You can't just leave it unsaid. You have to call it out. So as soon as a child realizes that you see that they're struggling or they're having issues, that's the first step. Because if you just go on about your business and you're teaching your content and you're not addressing this kid has less experience, then they're gonna want to quit. Yeah, they're not gonna want to stick with it.
So first step being just saying, hey, I see you're having maybe some issues with this. Let me help you. Yeah, and that's something that it can be easy to assume that a student might just ask for that extra help, but that's not really always the case, right? A lot of times you'll have kids that, if the teacher isn't there seeing what's going on, they're never going to speak up and maybe they feel embarrassed or maybe they're just shy.
Sure. There's also that comfort level of we haven't necessarily established trust yet.
Right.
So once the beginning part of every semester is going to be very difficult, especially in an Art 1 class, because they don't know me, I don't know them. I'm asking them to do something that they've never done and they're not confident in. So we have to establish that trust first. So that's until that has been established, it's very difficult to get them to ask questions. So there's a lot of me going to them and saying, hey, we see there's an issue here, and that's okay.
Right. And part of that trust, I think, is saying that it's okay that we have these mistakes going on. Certainly in my classroom, everyone on a daily basis will receive some kind of correction at some point.
Right.
And what I try to do at the beginning of the year is just to establish that that's not a negative thing. Like everyone is constantly making these little things where we could get better.
I try to relay my experience to where I was where they were at one point.
Yeah.
And occasionally I might have a piece of art that I did previously that wasn't the best.
Right.
I wish I still had a lot of the stuff I had from when I was
so
exactly
you could show
their
it.
age. And occasionally, like I said, I will come across things. Like I've got tons of superhero drawings that are from middle school. And I've shared some of that with some of my kids who like to draw things like that. But yeah, knowing that I've been there too, this is what it did look like. This is what it can look like. And let's talk about how we can get there.
Right, exactly. What does classroom management look like for you? For people who are listening who maybe aren't in education, classroom management is generally just policies and procedures and how you conduct the classroom, maybe how you deal with behavioral things or mitigate behavioral issues by having that structure.
Right. Well, we're in high school, so it could be different for younger ages. I started out teaching middle school, so that was tougher. But in high school setting, whenever I have issues, it's typically because I don't know. It's different every time, of course. You know this, but you just got to talk to them. I try not to call them out in front of their friends, especially because that's just going to be confrontational. So that's always bad. So I try to have conversations when maybe they get up to sharpen their pencil to where it doesn't look like it's out of nowhere. So trying to have conversations, and then sometimes I'll just ask them like what's going on. Sometimes it's totally unrelated to what's happening in the room, and usually it is whatever's happening. Bad behavior usually does not just come out of nowhere. That happens in the 90 minutes that you have them. It's something that happened that morning or the previous night. But they also don't want to share that information until you've gained a little bit of trust. So just talk to them.
Yeah, having that conversation. I definitely agree. In my experience, that's a big part. If you have that one or two students that have some sort of issue in class, having that conversation can go a long way. I find that when my lessons are more what's the word? Not busy, but like rapid. Not even that. I'm trying to say it more involved.
Okay.
I tend to have less classroom management issues from kids who would otherwise like get distracted and start talking or maybe think that they're finished.
Yeah, that's a whole discussion altogether right there.
Yeah, I have it on here.
Yeah.
But yeah, just having that movement in the classroom where we know what we're doing and we're moving on and we have that purpose of why we're here, I find that kind of helps.
Yeah, with art class, there's usually, if it's a beginning level class, usually about a project a week. So in some ways it feels like I'm doing the same thing for 5 days.
Yeah.
So I try to break down each day, like today's objective needs to be this. We need to get done with this step of the process. So I try to segment it each day, even though we're ultimately going towards the same goal that'll be done by hopefully Friday. But yeah, I try to segment it per day.
Yeah, and that in itself is a skill that you're teaching through art. That's something that I think, especially we elective people, sometimes may experience is the feedback of what's the point of teaching art? What's the point of teaching whatever it is? But there are other things, even if the kid never goes on to do art, there are these sort of meta lessons that are involved in it. And part of it is time management.
Sure.
in your case of doing projects and doing things step by step. Speaking on classroom management, let's say you have a kid who's maybe not so much a behavioral issue, maybe keeps to themselves, but also doesn't really want to do work. Maybe they landed in your class without actually choosing. Can't imagine that ever happening. How do you what are some strategies that you use to motivate kids in those situations?
I really find that once they get to, it goes back to that trust thing. Once they get to know you a little bit, they're more willing to try. So even if it's not something that they're totally into, that if they can feel comfortable, they're willing to try. I've found very, very few students ever to, once they try it and once they kind of get into it a little bit, that they don't follow through. It's a super rare occurrence. It happened more in middle school than it would in high school.
Sure.
Also, I set my expectations as clearly as I possibly can. I try to make them achievable. For my beginning level classes, I don't grade on skill at all. And really, I don't grade on the quality of the outcome. I grade on particular objectives that are attainable by anyone. So if we're drawing a face, for example, there are certain proportions that I'll give as part of my lessons. I have a breakdown of where to draw everything: eyes, nose, mouth, all that stuff. So did they actually use the method that I taught them? So did they break it down like I requested, or did they just do something random? So even if the drawing isn't perfect, if they attempted the methods that I taught, that's going to, first of all, it's going to yield a better product.
Right.
But it's also, they attempted it, they tried it. So I don't grade on skill or really finished product until later down the line. So more Art 3, Art 4, of course, AP Art, or my special effects class, that's going to be a whole different ballgame. But
so speaking of your special effects class, that's something that's so unique, I feel like, to Pinson that I haven't really even seen it. How did that come apart? What am I saying? Hopefully it never comes apart. How did that come to be?
It started, let's see, what are we in? This is going to be our 7th year. I think that's right. But it started because there was a need because of a previous project that had been going on. So now it's about 12 years ago. A buddy of mine who used to work at Pinson, Justin McElroy, he and I were having conversations about horror movies and Halloween and haunted houses. And he was saying, hey, there used to be a haunted house just a couple miles down the road from the school that he was part of. And I was explaining that at that time in the county, we were not able to charge fees for the classroom at all. So we had a zero budget. So I explained that, and he said, hold on, let's put this together. So we started talking, and we came up with a plan, and we presented to the mayor and the city council like what a haunted house could be if Justin and I did this. So we presented. They did not want to do it because the previous haunted house, the people who were in charge, which was not Justin, he was one of the actors in the haunt, and he coordinated some things, but he wasn't the owner of the attraction. They had disrespected the building. They had torn some things up. So it's like, okay, well, that makes sense why you don't want to do this, because they trashed this building. Right. And the building's really cool. It's a community center now, but it was an old schoolhouse that was built in 1937. So it's got great bones.
So it's already kind of haunted.
Yeah, there's some stories there, and that it's kind of creepy, but it is. Yeah, so we started there, and we did that as a fundraiser for the community and also the visual arts department that first year. It's not affiliated with the school; it's its own separate entity. But we write a check to the school, and we donate money every school year.
Okay.
So that's how the haunted house started, which then led into the special effects. So once the kids started getting in, like they wanted to act in the haunted house, they might want to help with some of the makeup. So I saw, okay, we've got to educate these kids on how to do these things, because they can't show up and expect to be able to know how to properly apply prosthetics or use an airbrush or build props or masks or costumes. So I presented that information to our now supervisor at the county level, and he was our principal at the time. So I presented the idea, and he's all about green lights. So he said, "Yeah, let's give it a shot. Sounds good." Yeah.
Huh.
So now, I've been going. If my math is right, this will be our 7th year.
And what's the name of the haunted house?
Insanitarium Haunted Attraction.
Insanitarium Haunted Attraction.
Yes.
Okay. And
Insanitariumhaunt.com.
There you go. I didn't even know you guys had a website, insanitariumhaunt.com. So your kids basically get an opportunity not only to learn this particular form of art that, I mean, gosh, I don't know if I know of another high school in the area, certainly, that does something like that.
Not in the area. I think there are now 5 high schools in the entire U.S. who have a program. There's a couple in California, there's one in Ohio, and then one in Colorado.
So you guys really are kind of pioneering that area
at this level, for sure. Yeah, at this level, there are plenty of makeup art schools,
right,
that do things like this at the college level. But as far as high schools, there's only a handful of us.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so the kids, they get to learn this, type of art that's very rare, as you just discussed. But they also have a place to show it at the end of their time in your class. They have that, I guess, recurring art show in a sense in the form of the haunted house.
So they have the option of being involved in the haunted house. That's not something that's required of them for the class, but quite a few of them want to get involved.
Sure.
So we're responsible for producing the makeup,
right?
As far as the haunt goes, and then if we have particular character things, like maybe some masks that need to be created, a specialty prop, we might be involved in that. But we aren't involved as much as we used to be because we have such an amazing staff at Insanitarium now that they take care of the build, the majority of the costumes. They're unbelievable. They're doing an amazing job. So it's allowed me to step back a good bit.
That's awesome.
And focus on teaching and other things.
Sure. And what are the dates that runs? Just to.
We typically start the last weekend of September and then run through the weekends of October. And then the week of Halloween is always different, just depending on when Halloween falls and what those dates will be.
Sure. Do you have any favorite movies that serve as inspiration for your special effects career as far as the haunting stuff goes?
So for art in general, it was Batman, and for special effects, I would say that it was American Werewolf in London was the first movie that it kind of blows your mind. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie.
Never seen it.
Okay, so after this, you need to go on YouTube and watch the transformation scene of American Werewolf in London. It is unbelievable. It's all practical. There's no CG.
Yeah.
It's in particular the artist Rick Baker is the man who pioneered some of the looks from that movie. He was the lead makeup artist in that movie.
Okay, and that's your, I guess, starting point for the inspiration.
Just because it blew my mind, because it felt so real, and it still does to this day. It's beautiful and disturbing at the same time.
I guess you would probably be in favor of practical over CG in general when it comes to special effects.
Well, yeah, I think as an artist, yeah, of course,
it'd be hard
as a physical artist. But there are definitely times when I think some of the coolest stuff that you see in movies now and TV shows is when they blend both. So when you have the practical and then you have the CG element, because there's only so much you can do on a human body because you can't take away. You can only add to.
Right.
So if you want to do something that looks like it's got a hole in it or it's caved in, then you're going to be going CG, or you're going to do a massive prosthetic buildup to make the other areas look reduced. Yeah. And then that's tough.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. The blended approach kind of does make for some interesting stuff. Like, you have a zombie, you got a lot of practical on their face, and then maybe you want a big hole in their head, so you do that on the CG side of it.
Get that green paint in there, and then fix it in post.
Just chroma key it out.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on from our special effects, let's get political. No, let's not really get political, but a conversation worth having since you're a teacher. Election year rolls around every 4 years.
Yeah.
And a kid in every class asks you about your political views at some point. The Wednesday after the big Tuesday, someone's going to ask who'd you vote for, all this sort of stuff.
Sure.
How do you address not just politics, but your personal opinions, things that are not necessarily related to your subject matter when you have students that ask you about that sort of thing? What's your approach to it?
My response is always, please, especially with our seniors, if you are of age, register to vote. Whether you like what's going on or don't like what's going on, take part. Mm-hmm. So that is my response. If they want to ask me what my leanings are, then they can ask, but I'm not going to answer. That's not my place.
Yeah.
If they want to ask an adult, they can ask their folks. They can ask people in their lives, but that's not okay. I mean, we're leaders in their life, and they look up to us, and that's. I don't want to be responsible for leaning them one way or the other. Of course, I have my own personal opinions.
Right. Yeah. No, I completely agree with you 100%. But you have, you can Google this sort of question online, and I have a few times just to see what other people say. And you will have some of those teachers that prefer the sort of open book, honest policy where anytime a kid asks me any question to do with anything political or personal, I just share. And then they're free to make up their own mind. And maybe at the collegiate level,
yes,
I could agree with that.
Agreed, yeah.
Because that's the point of going to college. You get exposed to these different views. And sometimes you get exposed to extreme views. Hopefully, I hope in college that you do. Although how much that happens nowadays, I don't know. But that's a different conversation altogether. But no, I feel the same way. And I certainly have my political views. Anyone that's friends with me on Facebook will know that. But I don't ever really share that stuff with my kids either, because the biggest reason, which you hit on, the reason of it's not your responsibility to sway them, or rather it is a responsibility to remain neutral or to not, sway with the authority that you have. But also, I think a lot of times kids have a sort of ideological predisposition based on their parents. So they're not at an age yet, usually, or a maturity level yet, where they've been exposed and really decide for themselves necessarily. And if I came out and said, I'm X, Y, or Z on this,
right,
now I've ostracized that kid potentially.
Yeah, because you're going to lose that trust you've established, hopefully.
You certainly do lose that trust because I guess in an ideal world, we have friends that are across all sorts of spectrums politically and ideologically and all this stuff. But when you're dealing with younger people who have not formed their own ideas to a large degree,
who haven't
you're
seen
really
the world yet.
Exactly. You're really dealing with copies of mom and dad.
That's right.
Or copies of someone, maybe copies of the internet if they're in a rebellion stage or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
And you wind up putting this unnecessary divide between you and that kid. If they don't have the, I guess, maturity level to be able to still respect you as a teacher,
right?
Despite
totally
your differing views. But no, I definitely agree with that. I keep that stuff way on the down low. And I'm sure since it's 2020, on Wednesday, November the whatever it is, I will be asked by several kids, and I'll have to say, well, and just dead silence. That'll be my answer. So interdisciplinary is the word I was trying to say right there and completely failed. Interdisciplinary collaboration being when art collaborates with other subjects. In my case, when Spanish teachers and maybe the culinary teacher, which I really want to do at Pinson but haven't gotten around to yet, does a collaborative effort. Have you done much of that? Or what does that look like for you?
Well, it happens a lot in special effects.
Okay.
Because the types of projects we do there are they're just all over the place. We have to be interdisciplinary, like you're saying. We work with industrial maintenance a good bit,
okay,
with some 3D printing of some items that we needed. We also work with industrial maintenance to build a functioning, quote unquote, functioning heart that we used as a learning tool for our anatomy classes.
Wow.
So we sculpted a heart. It was slightly larger than life size, just for demonstration purposes. Sculpted it out of clay, molded it in plaster, or a special type of plaster for molding prosthetics. And then inside the mold, we put in balloon latex. We ran that, and then it essentially was a balloon that was shaped just like the sculpture, and then we hooked that up to a pump that industrial maintenance built, so it could pump and beat.
That's awesome.
So that was a big project that took a long time.
I bet.
And we work in smaller areas with some of our art projects, so we try to involve math classes when we're doing perspective, because we're talking about angles. And we're using math when we talk about drawing faces with proportions as far as fractions go. We're talking about anatomy a lot. Every time we're drawing a person or a part of a person, we're talking about anatomy. So it does happen.
Right. I know you guys certainly collaborate with theater as well, because I've seen your backdrops and
mask.
Stuff like that. Yep, yeah. Mask, all that
For
sort of
Trumbauer
stuff.
this past year, we sculpted, molded, and made 5 original masks for Mr. Bailey's class.
Awesome. That's something that I personally would like to figure out how to do a little bit more in Spanish, is get into some of those other classrooms and get that connection going, because it's really interesting for the kids to sort of break those boundaries between and see where they can connect in those ways.
It makes it more meaningful too.
Yeah, for sure.
Because then you hear that question less of, when am I going to use this? What's the point of this?
Right.
Well,
here it is. Well, with art too, it's that question of when am I going to use this, or what's the point in particular. People, I think, really underestimate the amount of particularly graphic design that is just around them all the time. Anytime you interface with your phone or computer or anything like that, you're looking at the result of thousands and thousands of artists' work on this thing, and the coders are just telling the pictures to pop up here and there, wherever you see them. But somebody drew those, somebody designed it, and so it's certainly everywhere.
But in addition to of course, the skills that you would gain in an art class, to me, the whole point of an art class, no matter what level, art 1, 2, 3, 4, AP, special effects, or photography classes, or 2D designs, doesn't matter. It's all about problem solving. That is the goal, is learning how to solve a problem.
So that's something I was going to ask you, is what is your philosophical framework for why you do what you do? But you've come out and answered it already. So problem solving is at the base of art for you.
Yeah, because it really hits when we start doing having our advanced classes and our special effects, because those classes, they require you to take our intro level classes to gain some skills. Right. So in my beginning level classes, I'm concerned about them learning how to draw, learning how to design, learning how to paint, learning the basics of sculpture. And then in those advanced classes, it's about application. So at that point, they have the tools that they need to then solve the problems that either I present to them or they create for themselves.
Right.
And then that gets translated to their entire life, hopefully.
Yes. Okay. Let me piggyback off this. You're getting me excited here. Let me piggyback off this and ask you a question. Let me give some backstory. When anyone starts teaching, and I've only been teaching for this last year is my 4th year, but when anyone starts teaching and they're in that first year and that second year, and you start becoming aware, especially if you're in a public school, of the need there and of the situations that some of the kids come from, it's very tempting to feel, I think, compelled out of compassion to start seeing oneself as what I say in air quotes, so much more than a blank teacher, so much more than an art teacher, so much more than a math teacher. And I have my own theory about that. And I have been in that position when I was a first year teacher. I was certainly in that position where I felt like, my content matter is almost taking a back seat to a larger story. But since then, I have personally found that maybe that was an incomplete way of looking at things. And then actually being a great Spanish teacher, you can seat your philosophical purpose, your key purpose within your content matter, which is something that just now when you tell me that the key to art is problem solving, I feel like maybe you're kind of on the same page there. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. They're not disparate things. They're one and the same.
Right. And I think that's something, if anyone's listening, well, if anyone's listening at all, welcome to a brand new, welcome to our new show. And thank you. But particularly if you're a new teacher and you find yourself in those positions, because man, it really, if you're a new teacher starting out in a public school, you will be faced with kids who are in situations that will just break your heart. I mean, it really will. And it can be really tempting to start thinking, well, let's say you're an algebra teacher. It's easy to start thinking, well, I'm not actually an algebra teacher. I'm a social worker and a therapist and a this and a that, and algebra is only a very backseat thing. But and I'm not saying that those other things aren't important. Connecting with the kids is certainly important. But when you can find that there's value in algebra, and you have to figure out what that is. But when you can find what that is, to me, that's so much more useful to the community and to the world as a whole than you trying to be an expert in things that you're not trained to do. Like I'm just not a trained social worker. I can't see myself as that first and a Spanish teacher second, third, or fourth, or fifth down the line. So it's more useful in my mind to say, what is it that I'm doing? What's the thing I'm imparting? Is it the problem solving of art? What is if the kid never uses algebra again, what is it that they are going to use for the rest of their life that you're imparting through the algebra? And then how do you become the best algebra teacher in the entire world to try and convey that? And that's something where, and I'm ranting now, but no, but that's something where, like for me as a Spanish teacher, so you say problem solving is the underlying theme of art. And I agree. That's a perfect way to put it. For me as a Spanish teacher, the underlying, what would we say, inspiration or the thing there is that we're confronting the other.
Yes.
That's what it's all about. Like we figure out through this exposure to another language, there's other skills in there as well. There's literacy skills. But the philosophical underlying thing is you're going to confront the other if you try to learn another language, just period. And how you do that, it develops, things like compassion and understanding the sort of what I would think of as the sacredness of all life and what's common to all of us gets imparted through that. And so when my philosophical position is seated in, I'm sorry, I feel like I've just taken over, but
no,
when my philosophical position, I'm going to preach a little bit here. When my philosophical position on the goal of what it is that I do is seated within Spanish, now it's not that I am a public servant first and a Spanish teacher last, but it's that being a great Spanish teacher is a public service, and that's actually a really high bar to reach, is trying to get to that being a good Spanish teacher. It's not something that my training from school didn't impart to me, and now I have to go learn how to be everything else in the world. No, it's more like that's a very high bar that I strive towards. Anyway, I'm done with my sermon there.
No, that's fantastic.
But that's something I've been thinking about a lot the last year. I've started reading some Nietzsche last year, and he'll crush your soul and and make you really want to be a better person. So I try to start figuring some of that stuff out.
Well, yeah. You just kind of said that too. You need to be a person. You need to be a human being, and you need to see the people that you're teaching as human beings too.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. So getting off of my sermon and back into some,
that was great.
Back into some other stuff. I ask you, I have some questions here, and I put in here, what's the secret lesson of art? That's what I was going to ask you, but you already answered what the secret lesson of art is. So are you primarily a drawer more than a painter, or what's your flavor that you like the most?
I I like it all.
You
I
like it all?
all
Okay.
of it for different reasons. I mean, right now I am doing a lot of drawing because
Right.
I'm making YouTube videos for my students and for anybody else who wants to see them. So there's
And
a lot of
what's your channel, real quick? Just throw that out there.
Create Art with Chris.
Everybody go like and subscribe.
Yeah,
Create Art
please,
with Chris.
please. Yeah. So I started that because of quarantine and trying to get out some info to our kids and
Sure.
trying to.
Your videos look great, by the way.
Thank you.
The thumbnails look great. Everything looks great. You got
It's
the
been a
microphone.
challenge. It's been getting hopefully a little bit better as I go.
Yeah, no, I love it.
It's been fun. And that's been a new medium for me to play around with.
Right. That's sort of an art in itself, right?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. All the video stuff. It's so there's so much to it that you really don't appreciate until you start kind of
You're in the
doing
middle of it.
yourself. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sitting in iMovie, it's like, holy moly, this is a lot.
I was watching your Zentangle video
Yeah.
that you posted, and
Just
you
came out
said,
today.
I watched it earlier this morning. Well, I didn't watch the whole thing, I got to be honest. But at the beginning of it, you said you talked about making thumbnails so that you can make less mistakes later down the road, and that ties right into what you're saying about the problem-solving skill. You know, you give kids, you give your students through that thumbnail process of, you know, we're going to take 5 or 6 little miniature designs that can be a little sketchy and
Right.
won't matter so much if we mess up because they're not the final product anyway. Through that, you're imparting a lesson that goes beyond art, and it's not just let's say that kid never draws again in their life. Well, they've learned something about planning by doing that, right? And so going back to my sermon from earlier, that lends credence to the idea that art itself and being a good art teacher is a high goal. It's not not that that everything else is a high goal, but doing what you do is good. Do what you do, I guess, is my point.
I do all types of art. Right now a lot of drawing in the videos, but my training in college was in painting.
Okay.
So my degree is in painting.
Okay.
And I had not really painted that much, maybe a little bit in school, a little bit of tempera painting. I think I did a few watercolors when I was in high school, but beyond that, that was it. So I went into college thinking I'm just going to draw. That's going to be my degree. And at the time, that was not an option. Drawing was not a possible option. So I switched to what I thought might be the closest.
Yeah.
And that was painting. And I took my first painting class, and I hated it. It was... This material is moving around. It won't stay still. I can't apply it like a pencil. And then once it was right at the end of that first painting class, I had a painting that kind of worked.
Yeah.
So, okay, I think I'm starting to figure it out. So I took painting too, and I got into it, and that ended up being my major.
Awesome.
So I adore painting. But other than what I've been doing lately, I love sculpting too. I love making masks. It's related to special effects, of course, but it's a fun challenge because not only is the sculpting process fun because I get to make a three-dimensional project, three-dimensional creation, I can then make copies of that.
Right.
So molding the molding process is a lot. I had to learn how to do that several years ago, and that was a big challenge. But once I figured that out, you start changing your sculptures based off the molding process, but I can make copies and copies, and I do that. And I have an Etsy shop where I sell my mask, and
awesome.
it's
What's
fun.
your Etsy shop? Let's just plug it all.
Catacomb Chris.
Catacomb Chris.
Yeah.
I'll go check it out. Maybe I'll put in an order. We'll get a Conversapien mask that I can wear during interviews. Do you do any like casting with that sort of thing?
Yeah, so once the mold is made, then I can make multiple copies, like I was saying.
Right,
I'm making latex mask. I've gone away a little bit from natural latex because people have a lot of allergies to that. So there's several companies that make synthetic latex. So I've been using that, but you just pour it in your mold and then make your copy, and then you can paint it up whatever colors you like. And it's also cool because it's wearable art.
Yeah, exactly.
It's functional.
Do you have are your masks inspired from still the horror scene, or do you venture into other areas? Or
Yeah, so I learned mask making out of a necessity for our haunted house. We had characters that we wanted to. All of our characters are original characters at the haunt, but we wanted very particular looks, and no one had items like that. So I flew to Texas with Justin and took some 3-day class on mask making, and
Wow.
went from there. And now I teach that in my classroom.
Awesome. Now you're the mask expert. No, it didn't work. It didn't work. It didn't work. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. So here is a question or a conversation I wanted to open up.
Yes, sir.
That I think might get kind of fun. I'm minored in art. I'm not good at art, but I did minor in it. I thought at the time that I was going to double major in Spanish and graphic design and go on to do some graphic design. And then I realized that I would be in school for at least one more year, possibly two, if I did that. So I just said, you know what? Nope. I'll just use those hours to go to completing my minor since I already had them. So anytime you go into a studio class, particularly a drawing class,
Right.
this is something that I heard in the 3 drawing classes I took just constantly. You'll hear this criticism that's you need darker darks and lighter lights.
Yeah.
Which is essentially saying that your drawing is tending to be sort of not very contrasted and kind of flat. Why do you think it is that artists or people that are starting out learning art, particularly with graphite, but just really in any sense,
It is. It's across the board.
why do you think that's such a prevalent thing? And I'm going to piggyback onto that and say that I'm a person that really likes all arts in general, and I dabble a lot in music production. And it's the same thing in music production. You have flat mixes a lot when people are starting out where nothing's really, no big choices are made, and everything's kind of flat. So why do you think, do you have any ideas as to why that might be?
I definitely have my theory, and this will be my 19th year of teaching, so I think I'm pretty on it, but I see it as fear. They're
Yes.
afraid of making a mistake. They've got it to a certain point where it looks okay and maybe better than they thought it was going to be. So
Right.
they don't want to push it too hard because they think they're going to mess it up. So I see it as fear.
I certainly agree with your assessment. In the music aspect of it, it's 100%. That's what it is. When we're talking about those flat mixes, it's the fear of making a choice. It's the fear in that sense. It's the fear of making a big choice, of saying, you know what, I want to hear this big, drum right here. I want to have this crazy effect on this over here to make this stand out.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to, putting those big lines on the paper, those dark lines, pushing down a bit, I think, in art. And I would say that probably manifests across all arts. There's some kind of fear aspect where you wind up with just a sort of flat experience.
There's a secondary component too, and it's a lack of vision. They may not know what they need to do to get it to the place where I think it needs to be,
Right.
or a more experienced artist would see it needs to be, so that they don't know what it should look like.
Okay.
So there's this aspect, and it's something that I tell my students to draw what you see, not what you think you see. And that's just about learning how to observe. So
Right.
when you're making an observation, are you actually seeing it fully or not? And as far as a visual artist, the best thing that has happened to helping these kids see it when they couldn't see it before are our cell phones. If we take a photograph of whatever it is they're trying to draw and we turn it black and white, we just take that saturation down, turn it black and white, and then we take a picture of their drawing and take the saturation out and keep it black and white. And you put those two pictures side by side, it is clear. And they can, at that point, see, because they couldn't imagine it, they physically are seeing the difference. And then at that point, they're able to go back and darken things up, hopefully.
Right. Huh. That's an interesting strategy, but I could definitely see that being useful for sure.
Color is very distracting. Yeah, taking things into black and white is across the board in visual arts is a lifesaver.
Yeah.
So yeah, once you do that, you're not distracted by the colors you've selected. or even sometimes the textures, because you're able just to see the gray tones.
Do you have any modern pop art that you really like? Something that's sort of coming out maybe now or in the last 5-10 years that sticks out as sort of an aha moment for you, where you said, "Wow, that art was really, I guess, impressive."
Talking about visual arts.
Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness. I don't know if there's anything in particular. There's nothing jumping out to me right now. I know that Instagram has been huge for artists in seeing art that I never would have seen. People from across the globe. It's really made an amazing platform for artists just to have exposure.
Sure.
I know there are people that see some of my work, and I don't have a big following at all by any means, but there are people across the globe that have seen my work that I never would have had contact with. I've sold masks on Etsy to people in Russia, I believe.
Wow.
And they never would have seen my work except for Instagram. They saw an Instagram post that I had a hashtag of something that was piquing their interest that they'd been following, and they purchased some of my masks.
So social media, you think is, well, you've experienced, not necessarily think, but has opened new doors for visual arts in particular.
Which also makes it difficult to have a particular person that's caught my eye, because there's so many out there that are just amazing.
Any cartoons that you love?
Well, I'm super excited that like our students seem to be really liking Avatar: The Last Airbender.
I had never seen it until it hit Netflix, and I binged it in like a week.
I loved
every minute of it.
Yeah,
it's so good. The fighting scenes are great,
right?
Yeah, they're so good. They're so good,
and just the heart that's in that show is just it was unparalleled. It is the only animated show that I own on disc.
Okay. Have you seen the? Oh man, it's a really trippy show. The Midnight Gospel. I forgot what it was called. Okay, it's a the Adventure Time guy. I can't remember his name. He partnered with a comedian named Duncan Trussell, and
I know him.
Okay, so if you know Duncan Trussell, kind of crazy. They basically took episodes of Duncan's podcast from the last however many years he's been doing it. He's been doing it for a long time, and they animated. It's so strange to describe, but the guy from Adventure Time, like I said, directed the art, and they animated this world where Duncan's playing this character named Clancy, who has a computer simulator that simulates universes, simulates a multiverse, and he jumps inside of it and will go to some random planet, and he'll be like shaped as an avatar from that whatever he chooses to be, just like, on Facebook avatars or something like that.
Yeah.
And so he'll, collide with this Saturn planet where everyone's a dog or something, and he'll just go up to a random person and start interviewing them, and they just play the audio from his podcast. It's the wildest thing. So it'll be like 30 minutes of just and insane things will be happening visually. It's crazy, but it's so good. I'd highly recommend if you're interested in, like, for anyone who's interested in art, just watching these visual worlds that this dude creates are astonishing, and you can get lost in it because the dialogue is just the podcast. So it's like, I don't know, it's a wild experience where the visual art is telling its own story without anyone acknowledging it, because these are just two people talking. Maybe they're getting ground up into like meat and put on a sandwich or something, and this whole like crazy trippy story is happening that they don't respond to, because like I said, it's just audio. It'd be like taking this conversation and putting it on some crazy art. But it's super interesting, and
it's called what again?
It's called The Midnight Gospel.
The Midnight Gospel. Okay.
And the artists on that are super talented. It looks crazy. Just taking the main character Clancy and making him all these different avatars and still keeping that personality intact across, looking like a half dinosaur thing to looking like his normal self, but it still is the way that they managed to make it still look and be him is really interesting and really speaks volumes, I think, about, as far as like a modern example goes, about what art can do, that there's a personality inside that art. And not only is it the personality of the artist, but they've captured this fictional personality and can translate him across almost any shape or size, which is just wild. It's kind of mind-blowing to me. Speaking of that, how do you, well, this is such an abstract question. I don't even know if it's a good one, but
ask it.
How do you see personality manifesting in art, like in your students?
I don't see it as much in, of course, my early classes because
Sure,
we're focused on acquiring skills.
Sure.
So there's not there are opportunities to express themselves, but it's not as robust.
Right.
See that later. All right, I want you to ask the question again, so I can.
All right, it's not a great question, but I'll ask it again. How in visual art, how does personality manifest?
Yeah, so it definitely it's more seen in the later classes, so the Art 3s, 4s, AP in particular, because at that point since they've acquired their skills, they're able to put their personality into the work, whether that's with the medium they choose. The kids who might want more control are going to gravitate towards probably drawing,
Right.
because it's more controlled, and kids who are a little more expressive might go towards paint because they like how it can move. I think a lot of the mediums that get chosen, color palettes are definitely affected. I know that with our AP class, we talk about what types of materials you use should back up your concepts, your ideas. So with AP art, we have to come up with a kind of a question they're asking themselves. So these questions they ask themselves should lead to a sustained investigation of a certain concept. So we talk about material choice, we talk about color use, mark making. So all these choices affect what your goal is. So definitely it you can see their personality in their work.
Yeah. So you have them set up, particularly in AP, where they're making meaningful choices at every level of how that piece of art comes about. That's something that I, in my brief art career, which was very brief and kind of sad, but something that I definitely grew to appreciate in the classes that I took. Being someone that had not previously had a lot of experience and hadn't even taken art in high school, was you get to that point where you start to see these choices that you didn't even know existed before. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of gained the eyes to see other art. Like, it's really easy to go into an art museum and say, well, that looks stupid.
Or I could do that.
Or I could do that. Right, exactly. Or why would anybody, draw anything abstract ever? Or all modern art is trash. That sort of mentality is an easy one to fall into. But then when you're actually in the position where you have to create something, you start to appreciate all these choices that you never even saw before. Right. And it's so much to navigate. To figure out, like, it's more than just a painting. Like there's so many tiny things that artist did and things they could have did and didn't that speak to what that is. And I think really that's what people, for any listener who has ever thought, well, I could do that, or that's stupid or whatever, that's really the underlying point of a lot of that, maybe more abstract art even. There's artistry at a level that you wouldn't appreciate unless you had gotten to glimpse it a little bit. Speaking of abstract art, I saw a cartoon online, and it was like a little meme clip art cartoon. Mm-hmm. And on it, there was a painter who had on an easel a painting, and the painting was abstract expressionistic sort of thing. There was just sort of lines going on, and a person was critiquing their art. And the person said, that looks bad. And the artist in response says, oh, so you're judging how I feel. I thought that would be an interesting thing to discuss with you because you're a teacher, so you have to judge, particularly for art shows or in your upper level classes where that personality starts coming out a little bit. How do you balance that? And thinking about that cartoon, how does let's say the observer was a teacher, how would he respond to that sort of critique of his critique?
Well, I would want to know what the goal was. What
Okay.
was the goal of this piece? Now, it is true that there are certain design aesthetics. So we have our principles of design or elements of art that, as an educator, art educator, we would use to maybe have a checklist of what's quote unquote right or wrong.
Right.
So did we have good balance? Did we have good line use, good color choices? So there are certain things that are going to be more pleasing to the eye. So we can kind of grade it on an academic scale. But as far as is it a good or bad piece of art, what's the goal?
So you would judge it more based on what the goal was and how well they achieved the goal?
In the classroom, for sure. Just out in public, like say I was in an art show, had some pieces that I was showing and the other people around me. There are definitely going to be pieces that I'm going to gravitate towards more than others.
Right.
It could be because maybe they have similar aesthetics to me.
Right.
Honestly, it's usually not. The more similar they are to my work, the less I'm attracted to it. At an art show, I want to see something that's going to be, I don't know, challenging is not necessarily the right word, but in a certain way, yes. Yeah, that's a really tough question. It's in the academic setting, it can go one way, and yes, I could see like, okay, that's not a successful piece of art.
Right.
Maybe not it's bad or good, but it's not as successful as it could be. That's tough. That's a tough one.
Yeah, no, it is, because I think that whoever made that cartoon, they have a point.
Yeah.
But then there's also whoever's ever had to critique art also has a point, you know. So there is a bit of a balancing act in navigating what's right in that scenario. You know, how much does your explanation as the artist weigh into whether or not that's a good piece of art? Is there an objective good piece of art?
Well, you shouldn't have to explain your art.
So it should speak for itself.
To me, that's a goal of mine. Is I should not have to explain what's happening.
Right. Okay.
And maybe the stuff that you've seen, I wouldn't qualify as art of mine. But most of that stuff is sitting in my basement.
Okay.
Down here. But yeah, it goes into my brain when I talk about in the classroom. So I'd run down my checklist of things that would make a successful piece of art, and does it have that? So I'm going to pick it apart at that level too.
What are some of those things? I think you briefly mentioned a second ago, but just to refresh.
We talked about contrast earlier, about work looking too light. Contrast is definitely a goal of mine. I want my images to lack of a better word, pop.
Yep.
I want them to stand out. So that's a big deal. And contrast can be with lightness and darkness of color. It can be contrast of textures, contrast of line. It depends on what I'm making, but that's a big one for me. Composition is huge, and that goes across the board at a beginning level or an advanced level. Composition, the layout on your page, that's everything. So is it balanced? And there's plenty of rules there, like the rule of thirds. I'm sure, since you had a graphic design background, I'm sure you know the rule of thirds is crucial.
Yes. I didn't, just to clarify, I didn't really have a background. I had a thought that I quickly realized was not a reality. But no, yes, for sure. In my structure classes, we talked about those sort of elements, and that's another, talking about from a second ago, that there's things that it's hard to appreciate as if you haven't ever, I guess, delved into the world of art. If you just go into a museum and you're starting to critique things, it may be hard to appreciate some of those ideas about what composition should look like. But then at the same time, you may have a general idea of what looks good and what doesn't, and just don't know what the reason for it is.
I think naturally we have a predisposition to knowing what looks good and what looks bad. I mean, we were talking about movies earlier. We watch a movie and it's good. We like it, or like this is hot garbage. We have that gut reaction, and then that happens in visual art too. Is that we have this reaction that we may not can explain why. Maybe artists can explain why, or maybe art teachers, because that's what we do. Is that we can explain why we think this is successful.
Right.
But yeah, inherently we do.
Yeah, no, I think that's similar in music theory. Everyone knows if something is on beat. I mean, for the most part, a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people, probably the majority of people, can tell if something is out of key or something is kind of wonky or doesn't quite sit right. In the song. They may just not have the vocabulary, the academic vocabulary to describe what it is that they're reacting to. Let's say that I am a student of yours on YouTube. I just started watching your YouTube, and I'm trying to learn how to draw because you've been doing a good bit of drawing videos. What do you think the key for beginning to learn how to draw is? What's the number one takeaway from this starting point? What should I focus on first?
You have to learn how to see. You have to learn how to observe. If you can't do that, you can't pick apart your pieces to understand what went wrong.
How do I go about learning how to see?
Yeah. So I actually have a lesson. One of my previous videos is it's about shape drawing. And the whole goal is to draw what you see, not what you think you see. And in that video, I have a copyright-free photo of a bird that I found on Google, and I break it down into its most basic components. I'm not talking necessarily about how the anatomy of a bird. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the basic structure of how to represent that into a drawing. So as the artist, this is how I use my artist X-ray vision to examine that particular photograph to break it down into more attainable shapes. And then from those shapes, I then expand upon it to add texture and detail and shading. So learning how to see what's there in its most basic form to then take to that detailed layer.
Do you use the upside down drawing thing in your classes for that sort of thing?
I have before. If I have a kid who is just their brain is fighting themselves.
Yeah.
And they keep drawing the same symbol of an idea, and that's what happens in those early stages is that a lot of kids will draw a symbolic representation of what they think it should be, because no matter what level of experience you have, when you were a kid, you probably drew a face. So for drawing faces, they start drawing what they did when they were in 6th grade.
Right.
Because that's usually about where their art education stops, or their natural art education stops. So we have to just get rid of the symbolic representation and to actually examine what's in front of us. So yeah, in those cases, you can absolutely turn upside down. If you're using a photographic reference, it's very easy because you just physically turn it upside down and draw it that way. And it does work. It gets them out of their habits. The drawing doesn't always look great, but it's going to be closer to realism than what it was previously.
Right. They can kind of get a starting point going.
Yeah.
Everyone has the symbol of that they draw for a house. And it's like, you can't go into that house.
Or a sun in the
fall
corner
down.
of their sheet of paper.
Yeah. Everyone has those symbols.
Or
that
the
doesn't
cotton ball
necessarily
clouds.
mean it looks like that.
Right.
So my last questions are about inspiration and how inspiration manifests for you. I say that, but I may ask you another question after that. But I'm going to ask you now about inspiration. Couple things. Have you ever experienced the time lapse effect?
Where you just lose yourself?
Yeah.
In the moment?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, everyone has experienced that. How wild is that?
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's so strange. Can you think of a time when you've had something like that happen that was like an inordinate amount of time where that's just gone?
It happened a lot in college because I didn't really have someone to come to the studio and say, hey, you skipped this meal.
Yeah.
So
were you an all-nighter in college?
It did happen from time to time.
Yeah.
I'm not typically a person who likes to stay up late. I would rather go to bed and then get up early and get going.
Right.
That's just me, and maybe it's because we've been trained to do that as teachers.
Right.
But yeah, it happened all the time in college. It doesn't happen as much now because my wife kindly will say, "Are you coming upstairs?" And that doesn't happen too terribly often, but yeah, it does happen, and it's usually when I'm deep in the middle of making things happen, when I'm hitting that progress, and it's that little carrot on the stick, like, okay, I got this, and now I need to get this, and need to get this.
Right.
So I see all these problems that need to be solved laying in front of me. So that's definitely when I lose my time.
Yeah, and I think that's such an amazing, anything dealing with the proverbial zone, of
Right.
inspiration, the effects that it has psychologically are so interesting because it happens across arts. It happens across disciplines, not even arts. I mean, you could reach that state doing something that has nothing to do with art. People hit it running, for example, and gaming for sure, and just lose track of time and are so focused. There's a guy that I listen to quite a lot, but he talks about how when you're in those moments, you lose self-awareness in particular, which is something I had never thought about until I heard him say that. But I've definitely had that experience working on something like whether it be a drawing when I was in college, muddling my way through a minor, or more pertinently for me, doing music mixes probably, or songwriting. Not only do you lose track of time, but you're thinking. It's almost like not thinking. I mean, you are clearly thinking, and your thinking is all focused on the problem that you're solving, right? But you're not, you don't, like you said, maybe you don't eat. Like you have no awareness of you, I guess. Instead of you, it's just it, right? It's just the thing in front of you. But I find that so interesting. Have you ever had a moment, and I'm sure that you probably have, but have you ever had a moment where you did a piece of art, you were working on something, and maybe you made these choices that you maybe don't even really remember, or you don't?
Sure.
What's the?
Yeah, it's like
it
driving
feels like
home
you didn't
and you didn't
do
know how
it.
you get. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels almost like something else did it through you. I guess you've experienced that before.
Absolutely.
That's another just mystery to me that I hope maybe one day we can tap into to figure out a little bit more. But that stuff is fascinating to me because I could sit here. What's crazy is, you're a visual artist. I do other art forms, and I can describe this knowing very confidently that you're going to say yes to these things because it's such a universal experience.
Yeah.
Where people forget the time, they forget themselves, and it feels like they're, I don't know, channeling the spirit of some other person. whatever the thing is, like they're not doing it just themselves, but they're part of it. They're just almost observing it happen to themselves. But it's crazy. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that up and get you to say yes to stuff.
I don't know how else to respond to that other than yeah.
Yeah. No, it is. And I knew, I was like, he's an artist, he's going to say yes to this stuff. I just want to bring it up. So
that would be sad if I said no, though.
It would be. I would be like, have you really ever done art? I mean, I have a last question for you, and then I'm going to let you go. Do you do any other arts? And if so, do you notice any parallelisms, maybe philosophically or otherwise, between visual art and those things?
I don't. Just the visual is all I do. I love other arts. I mean the big event at this household last week was watching Hamilton on Disney Plus. I mean that was scheduled. Like we are doing this today. So yeah, I love theater and music but that's not in my wheelhouse.
But perhaps across from sculpture to drawing, you would certainly maybe see parallels there. Well, I mean, I guess that's all in the visual arts spectrum. So I don't know.
Is. It definitely. I will say that the more involved I became with sculpture, the easier it was for me to make choices 2D. Because I could imagine that third dimension far easier because I had physically made things before. I could understand how shadows would fall on an object better. I could understand how things would wrap around an object for the third dimension.
Right.
So it definitely informed my drawing and painting. And I think enhanced my work, but also made me faster because there wasn't that discovery of, okay, well, let me just figure out how this is going to work. I could see it in my head before I could do it.
Right. So you didn't have to do that light guesswork, I guess.
Right.
All right. Well, what is your YouTube and what's your Etsy and what's your Instagram? One last time.
Well, I have several of each of those because I have a different projects going on. But my YouTube is Create Art with Chris, and I have an Instagram of the same name. My mask work, the Etsy shop is Catacomb Chris. There's also a website, catacombproductions.com, where you can see a lot of my masks there. The Instagram for that is Catacomb Production. If they want to see some really cool art stuff, that right now primarily it's videos that I'm putting out, but our Instagram for our high school, PVHS _visual _arts. There's some really amazing work from some of our students. Some of the more recent posts would be the 3 AP art students that just graduated in May. Some of their portfolio work is on there, and it is phenomenal.
Okay. And then the haunted house website.
The haunt is insanitariumhaunt.com.
All right. Well, Chris, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
First episode. Looks like we went for about an hour and 20 minutes or so. And I feel good about it. I feel good about our conversation, and I'm glad.
Good.
My voice will stop cracking. I'm glad that I was able to get you on here. So thanks again. Everybody check out Chris's fabulous YouTube channel to learn how to do some art. I'm definitely going to go back and start looking at it, maybe refresh on some of those drawing shapes and getting better at that sort of thing.
Excellent.
So thanks again. That's our first episode of Conversapiens. Thanks for listening.